It would seem odd to feature Lake Powel as a river, but it is a reservoir formed by damming up the Colorado River. As it rapidly dries up, the water supply for 40 million North Americans is disappearing before our eyes, and the river and its hidden treasures are reappearing. Come join us in exploring this new wonderland by houseboat and kayak.
The Living Peace Foundation is honored to provide funding support for Wild Rivers with Tillie, supporting people and projects that creatively and courageously advance collaboration, compassion, and living peace. This series shares the passion that the Living Peace Foundation has for the health and connectedness of our planet and all who inhabit it.
I am veteran river guide and conservationist Tillie Walton. Join me as I lead different groups down the great rivers of the American West. Oh, it's like so narrow. We're driving house. Here we are in the middle of the desert on one of the largest man-made reservoirs in the world. This lake is formed by the Colorado River, and it hits a dam called Glen Canyon right above the Grand Canyon. And when Glen Canyon Dam was built in the late 1960s, it flooded out an area called Glen Canyon. And Glen Canyon was once called more beautiful than the Grand Canyon. And so as we face drought in the west and the waters recede, Glen Canyon is emerging and our water supply is draining. Glen Canyon once had over 4,000 cultural sites. We're standing here on the homeland of the Navajo, Hopi, Zuni, and many other tribes that have an affinity and affiliation for this area and a deep connection going back thousands and thousands of years. When you put a dam on a river, not only do you change everything downstream of the dam, but you also change everything upstream of the dam. And it's now underneath the water of Lake Powel. And it's kind of the equivalent of flooding the Sistine Chapel, where you could only see the spires left out from the water.
Navajos, Native Americans, we are part of the earth. We're part of the water. We're part of the rock, sand. When we go to the next world, we go back into the earth, and that's where we came from. So that's what we believe as Native Americans, as a Navajo. This is our church. It's not one building, the whole canyon. You say your prayers when you put your corn pollen into the water.
We think of these rivers, and especially this one, as like they're the life, the veins of the earth, our lifeblood of the earth. And you see sites all over the Southwest, and we see that as our Hopi footprints. And those are our spiritual connections that were laid by our ancestors upon from our emergence. They migrated in all directions. It took our ancestors to leave these things for us to remember. And that's what you see petroglyphs, and it'll tell what clans went through there, maybe what direction they went, what part of their journey they were on. And those are all indicators for us of like that we're still here. When you put in something like an electrical line or a fence line or a dam, that cuts off that connection.
The thing that really impresses me about the landscape is the number of dimensions by which it can be viewed. Native Americans see this landscape as sacred land. They're walking on the dust of their ancestors. Western society sees this landscape as an economic windfall in many ways. If you're a geologist, it's just another dam in the landscape. Speaking as an ecologist, looking at this landscape, there are many parts of it that are intriguing, things we don't know about yet. The loss of Glen Canyon, inundated landscapes that we will not recover. Springs that held unique species, archaeological sites that some of which are re-emerging, but many of which are lost. If we were to propose something as big as Glen Canyon Dam now, it would be soundly rejected because Glen Canyon is a just absolute wonderland.
So we're kind of in the middle of what looks like Monument Valley, but with water. And as the lake levels are dropping, they're leaving a bunch of sand. And so we kind of see how these cliffs were once formed, because as the lake drops, it leaves all the sand just like the ocean would have. And so the sand and the seashells eventually get compressed, and over millions of years of time harden into these sandstone cliffs, and they're carved and eroded by wind and rain and the geologic forces of the earth. It's really interesting to see all the color of Glen Canyon as it comes out, and it's sort of raw, and the red sandstone part has kind of been leached out, and it's more of a peach color. You've been running in the Grand Canyon for a long time.
I never thought in my lifetime I would see Glen Canyon coming back, or Lake Powel starting to resemble a river again.
What does that mean to you as a river runner?
That to me is really exciting, and the exploration possibilities are phenomenal. It's not going to be a free-flowing river, but the water's going through the landscape in a little more of a river-type way.
As Glen Canyon reemerges, as the lake is dropping, we get to explore all these new gems. We're going to paddle into a lot of these side canyons because they're too narrow to take a larger craft into. And then when we get to where we can no longer paddle, we'll hike and see what there is to see. We're standing here on what once used to be the lake bed. We would have been 40 feet underwater in this vast expanse of water. And it's an interesting thing because this isn't really the Colorado River anymore, but it's also not the Lake Powell that we once knew. We're seeing a representation of the hybrid of how we get to adjust to our new normal. The whole situation in the West with the Colorado River and Lake Powell, it's almost like the story of the blind man looking at the elephant. Everybody feels a different part of it, and one man feels the tail and says, it's this, and the other man feels the trunk and says, it's that, and the other person feels the body and says, oh, it's this huge thing. And Lake Powell and the Colorado River are kind of like that, depending on your viewpoint. If you're a geologist, you think, this is just a blip in time. It doesn't matter. If you're an outfitter for Lake Powell and a houseboater, this is a major loss with the Lake Powell going down. If you are a river runner, it's kind of exciting that Glen Canyon is coming back. And just depending on your lens, there's a different viewpoint for everybody for this place. And the common thing is that everybody depends on the water, everybody has a connection to the water, and everybody's gonna have to adapt to the changes in the water. I've always said a boat is a boat is a boat, but this thing is huge. We're driving a houseboat on Lake Powell. Luckily, there's nobody else out here, but we're looking up at the cliffs and we can see where the lake used to be, and it's dropped about 150 feet, and it keeps dropping. And the houseboat is a huge industry. We came here through the marina and saw some of the biggest boats I've ever seen. And having spent a lot of time below the dam, I've never spent time here up above the dams. The lake is at the lowest level that it's been in since the dam was built, right?
Yep, ever. Yeah, in March it actually dropped below the elevation of 3,525 elevation above sea level, which was big bright red flashing light danger sign for water availability in the basin. And we've seen this coming. It's been kind of like a slow moving train over the last 20 years. We are at the station now, and we have to figure out how to live with less water. That's why water supply is so important at Lake Powell, because it serves as essentially a bank account for the upper basin states, for Colorado and Utah, New Mexico and Wyoming. If we can store water here, we can protect our ability to send water to senior water users in the lower basin, California specifically, but also certainly Yuma. Yuma alone grows about 90% of all the winter vegetables that we eat in this country every year.
Lake Powell and the Colorado River provide drinking water for 40 million people in 7 different states in the U.S., as well as the country of Mexico. Where we're standing right now used to be probably under 50 feet of water. I can tell there's tons of seashells all over the ground, and they go way up and way back there.
Lake Powell is in its lowest water condition since 1967. We're facing what turns out to be one of the driest periods of time in the last 1,000 years. The lake has its own kind of unique hydrograph. The flows of the upper Colorado River come in, the lake rises sometimes 30, 40 feet in a normal year, and then drops back down again. The water comes in as snowmelt happens in the Rockies, water level builds up, and then water is being released downstream, especially in the summer for air conditioning and cooling in Phoenix and Las Vegas. Drought comes on as it has in the last 2 decades here. The lake level gradually sinks down and gets to lower levels. A crisis not only in water availability to the southwest, but also in power production. That power can't be produced when the lake gets to a certain level. More politics than water in this landscape. And the less water it is, the more ferocious the politics become. The public has this kind of illusory benefit of imagining that there is enough water to support us, which in times of drought, that illusion is quickly evaporating, almost becomes a mirage at that point. What happens during drought periods is that we use more groundwater. Groundwater supplies are our long-term insurance for sustainability of the Southwest, for human populations. If we deplete our groundwater supplies, we are out of water. This has happened here before. 1,000 years ago, this landscape was abandoned by humans because of this kind of drought situation.
As everybody has to keep adapting to these new conditions, the marinas are doing the same thing. They're building these big ramps down to the boats. They're creating floating marinas. Everybody keeps extending their infrastructure to accommodate the dropping lake levels, including the dam. We are having to go lower and lower on the intake valves.
I think we're going to kayak into this gorge, a secret one that most people don't know about.
We are going on an adventure. We're getting ready to head up into this canyon and go check it out. The water is supposed to get narrow and narrower, and we think we're going to come to a spot where the water ends, and then we can start hiking. You can kind of see where it used to be on the wall in front of us. It's almost like if you had like skin and you've been in the bathtub too long and it's like wrinkled. It's the canyon has been in the lake too long.
Look at the light dancing off the rocks. That is gorgeous.
We're in this very narrow spot in the canyon, and it's 86 feet deep here, according to the depth finder on our boat. And I can only imagine that it's just a narrow, narrow slot underneath us. This is beautiful. It feels like the canyon walls are starting to close in here. And what's known as a slot canyon is when they get really, really skinny together, and then they kind of weave together in like a wave, like a sandstone wave. You can see that it's been bleached out. So this would have all been underwater, this canyon. So this is an idea of part of the things that are down below the water throughout the whole entire lake here. And they're starting to come out.
You know, we get so used to like looking at the water lines at Lake Powell and Lake Mead, but what's really remarkable about this canyon and this face is that there's a mussel line. This whole wall is covered in mussels up to about 120 feet above my head. And I think that there's zebra mussels. It's an invasive species that cause real problems in western reservoirs. They clog up intake pipes, they get on boats.
Okay, we're coming up into the slot canyon. We can't take the boats any farther, so now we get to wade through this really cold water, kind of mucky, but yes, it's icy and also really cool. The canyon's like super narrow here. You can see all this sand and silt here. This is the Colorado River. Usually has so much sediment in it, so it's called, you know, the Rio Colorado because it's so muddy. And here you can see a little microcosm of how the sediment's deposited by the river. Wow, you wouldn't expect to find this here. Wow, it's like so narrow. All you can see is this tiny slit in the of sky through the rocks.
There's like not very many footprints here either.
Yeah. It kind of looks like this rope may have been from a boat even. Like it could have been part of a rope tying up a houseboat here. If we were standing in our bank account and our bank account had been full of money, which is water, which is actually more important than money in the end of all of it, we can see how we've really just drained our entire bank account of water.
This is a region that's heating faster than almost any other region in the country, and so it's not just about snowpack and rain, it's about heat, and a hotter environment sucks more water out of the soil, out of the trees, out of the reservoirs, out of the rivers, out of the lakes than ever before.
And here, you know, we have this gigantic lake in the middle of the desert, and when sun shines on the water, we lose about 1 million acre-feet a year on the reservoir when it's
Between
full.
Lake Powel and Lake Mead.
Oh, between both of them, yeah.
About 20 miles upstream of here, I think that's where most of the sediment is dumped from upstream. Lots of sediment from these side canyons when they wash and from other tributaries that come in. Oftentimes that sediment is dropped kind of in the upper ends of the reservoir.
We made this map so that it would be a good visual aid to represent all things Lake Powel.
And it's been fascinating too, I think, on this map, how short Cataract Canyon is compared to the extent of the Colorado River corridor that we're really looking at, and the impacts of the Glen Canyon Dam way, way, way down here.
So about 20 miles below the confluence of the Green and the Colorado Rivers is where we do a lot of our work. Cataract Canyon is a stretch that's 41 miles long, and prior to Glen Canyon Dam, this stretch of river had anywhere from 49 to 65 rapids. But when Glen Canyon Dam was built and it started to inundate the Colorado River and make Lake Powel affected almost 60% of Cataract Canyon. Let's say there were only 23 rapids left. In the early 2000s, things really started to change. The reservoir level declined drastically, and we started seeing rapids coming out of the reservoir. But the other thing that we're watching as the reservoir level continues to decline is this sediment is being mobilized. And so what was inundated by water is now getting covered in mud. The sediment deltas are growing and they're moving. So imagine that this giant sediment glacier, or a mud glacier is an easy way to look at it, is going downstream at a rate of about 50 or 100 feet a day, burying the river corridor in this mud. And Lake Powel is the most scenic settling pond in the world. We need to make better decisions about how we're going to manage this river. It's not responsible for us as a culture to kick it further down the road. What we're finding is that given the chance, the river can recover.
Sediment transport is a really important part, especially of the Colorado River. It's a river that was known as the Red River because it oftentimes ran red because of the sediment loads that it was carrying.
Yeah, they used to say it was too thin to plow and too thick to drink.
Yeah. It's moving sediment, it's moving sand, it's moving gravel downstream, and that's creating sandbars, which is creating habitat for fish.
I never thought I'd see the water level change things. I try to be optimistic with it since so many people are afraid of the water level. They're afraid to come here because, you know, safety and accessibility and so forth.
Yeah.
Back in the early 90s, it was, you know, a houseboating world, and you go fast and water sports. And now it's just kind of evolved into kayaking and hiking, and so yeah, it's changed a lot over the years. But it's the world of houseboating it's in my world. It is our livelihood, and our whole community is about tourism. We don't have the power plant, and we really need our recreation in all areas. And not just Antelope Canyon slot tours and Horseshoe Bend. We need the people to come to Lake Powel.
What's kind of cool here is we can see geology at work. So we see this sandstone, and these are the ripple marks that the water leaves, like you see at the beach when you see the ripply marks of the sand underneath the water. This is the rock. It's all made of sand, and it breaks apart. So this compressed earth is what then creates these gigantic sandstone cliffs that we have. This is pretty wild because all this stuff we're walking through right now was probably underwater at one point.
Yeah, no, not too long ago.
Yeah.
Up here, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Oh yeah, I mean here I'm still seeing these little shells.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And when we come up over here, I mean, we would have been right here and been able to jump off into the water.
Yeah, well, like look at this, cracked earth. Last
Yeah.
year that was covered. I think one of the better visualizations I've seen yet of the canyon coming back.
Yeah, it's super striking to me here because I see our boat way down there, and then I look across and I see this water line that's up above us.
We're out there and we're seeing depths of like 200, 300 feet. There's a lot of water still in the lake. You know, 30% of 25 million acre feet is still a lot of water, but we have to understand, right, that 40 million people depend on this river.
Somebody might say, but this is a lake. What are you talking about? Why do we keep on talking about it as a river?
Well, it's a man-made lake. It's a reservoir, right? So it was created when we dammed Glen Canyon Dam in the early 1960s. So while it is a reservoir and people look at it and they call it Lake Powel, lakes are natural, reservoirs are not. It is a slowed down, deep spot in the river.
This is a big sheer drop off here.
Yeah.
Would have been fun if water was in there because you could have done some good cliff
this
diving.
would have been a great cliff diving spot not long ago.
Prime cliff diving. The Colorado River is naturally very salty and saline, so when you get it out in these high temperatures and it evaporates, a lot of times behind it'll leave that white mark on the soil, which is just salt essentially sitting on top. Everybody, depending on their lens, is dependent on this river, whether it's somebody producing power, a farmer, or your green lawn in Los Angeles. You all depend on this water supply, which is slowly diminishing. And as it does, the beauty of the canyon starting to emerge again. But the question that remains to be seen is, how will we all do more with less water? At some point, Mother Nature is going to dictate what happens to the dam, what happens to the lake, and what happens to our water supply for the western United States. In this vast expanse of desert, we have just touched the tip of the iceberg for all the cool places that you can explore. So there's 180 miles of Lake Powell, or really in this new reality, 180 miles of emerging Glen Canyon that are here for the exploring.
The Living Peace Foundation is honored to provide funding support for Wild Rivers with Tillie, supporting people and projects that creatively and courageously advance collaboration, compassion, and living peace. This series shares the passion that the Living Peace Foundation has for the health and connectedness of our planet and all who inhabit it.
I invite you to visit us at wildriverswithtillie.org for wildriverswithtillie.com.